The Valdorian Empire ruled the galaxy like a disease spreading through the stars. Their massive crimson warships, each one the size of a small moon, carried the battle scars of 3,000 conquered worlds. The hull plating on their dreadnoughts was made from the melted remains of entire civilizations, forged in the fires of planetary bombardments that had turned lush worlds to lifeless rocks. Admiral Vexler was the most feared commander in the Valdorian fleet. Standing nearly 12 feet tall, his reptilian form was covered in ceremonial scars from battles across the galaxy. His yellow eyes glowed with the satisfaction of a predator who had never known defeat. The bridge of his flagship, the Bloodclaw, was decorated with trophies from fallen enemies, crystallized remains of the last Altarian kings, the fossilized wings of the Seraphim race, and the preserved neural cores of the cybernetic Nexus civilization. Another day, another world to claim, Vexler muttered, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the recycled air. The bridge crew of lesser Valdorians worked silently at their stations, knowing that their admiral's mood could turn deadly without. Warning: the tactical display showed a small solar system on the outer rim of the galaxy. It was unremarkable in every way, a single yellow star with 9 planets, most of them barren rocks or gas giants. But the third planet caught their attention. It was blue and green, covered in water and primitive life. Commander Zixron, Vexler, called to his tactical officer, a smaller Valdorian with cybernetic implants replacing half his skull. "What do our scouts report about this system?" Zixron's mechanical eye whirred as he accessed the data. The planet is called Earth Admiral. Population approximately 8 billion. They call themselves humans. Bipedal mammals, average height 6 feet, lifespan roughly 80 years. They achieved nuclear fusion only recently and have barely begun exploring their own solar system. Mandibles clicked together in what passed for Valdorian laughter. Primitives playing with fire. How quaint. What level of threat do they pose? Minimal, Admiral. They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no hyperspace capabilities beyond basic jump drives. Their largest warships are barely 500 meters long. Our smallest cruiser could obliterate their entire fleet. The bridge fell silent as Vexler studied the rotating hologram of Earth. He had seen thousands of worlds like this one, young civilizations that thought they were alone in the universe, blissfully unaware of the predators lurking in the cosmic dark. They were always the easiest to break. Standard subjugation protocol, he decided. Send 3 heavy cruisers to their outer colonies. Make an example of them. When they see what we can do, they'll surrender without a fight. The human colony on Kepler 442b had been humanity's greatest achievement. Over 200,000 colonists had spent 30 years transforming the rocky planet into a second Earth. They had built cities under protective domes, established mining operations, and created a thriving agricultural sector in the underground hydroponic farms. Dr. Lee Minja was working in the botanical laboratory when the sky turned red. She looked up from her research to see massive shapes descending through the atmosphere like falling mountains. The Valdorian cruisers were over 2 kilometers long, their hulls glowing with the heat of atmospheric entry.
Owie.
To all sectors, she managed to say into her communicator before the first plasma cannon opened fire. The terraforming stations vanished in balls of superheated gas, their metal structures melting like candles in a furnace. The residential domes cracked and shattered, exposing the colonists to the thin atmosphere. The attack lasted less than 4 hours. When it was over, Kepler 442b was a graveyard. The Valdorians had taken no prisoners, destroyed every structure, and left the planet uninhabitable. It was a message written in fire and death across the cosmos. On Earth, Admiral Kim Dae-ho stood in the United Earth Defense Command Center, a massive underground facility built into the Rocky Mountains. The holographic displays showed real-time data from across human space, colony ships reporting strange readings, deep space monitors detecting massive energy signatures, and then ... silence. Kim Dae-ho had spent 40 years in the military, fighting. In the corporate wars and the Martian independence movement, he had seen humanity at its worst and its best, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The casualty reports from Kepler 442b were beyond comprehension. "Sir," Communications Officer Park Sujin said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're receiving a transmission from the attacking fleet." The main display flickered to life, revealing the nightmare face of Admiral Vexter. His reptilian features were enhanced by cybernetic implants that glowed with malevolent energy. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2,000 years of conquest. "Primitive humans," Vexter's words dripped with contempt. "You have witnessed the power of the Valdorian Empire. Your pathetic colony is now dust floating in the void. This is your only warning. Surrender your worlds, submit to our rule, and we will grant you the mercy of slavery. Your species will serve us in our mines and factories. Your children will be raised as servants to our young. This is more than most species receive." The command center was dead silent. Every person in the room understood that they were staring at the face of extinction. The alien's yellow eyes seemed to burn through the screen, promising death to any who dared resist. Kim Dae-ho stepped forward, his weathered face showing no emotion. He had been born in the ruins of Seoul after the Third World War, had watched his family die in the plague years, had crawled through the mud of a dozen battlefields. He had seen humanity's capacity for both cruelty and heroism. "I have a message for you, alien," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Humanity does not kneel. We have faced extinction before, and we are still here. Come and try to take our worlds. We'll show you what happens when you threaten the human race." The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Vexter's laughter echoed through the Blood Claws bridge, a sound like breaking glass and dying screams. But there was something else in that laughter, a note of anticipation. The Valdorian admiral had broken 1,000 species, but none had dared to defy him so boldly. This would be interesting. 3 months after the massacre at Kepler 440b, the Valdorian Second Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. Admiral Vexter had expected to find a broken civilization begging for mercy. Instead, his sensors detected something that made his blood run cold. Humanity had been busy. The space around Earth buzzed with activity like a disturbed ant colony. Massive construction platforms floated in orbit, their robotic arms working around the clock to build new warships. The humans had somehow managed to triple their fleet size in just 3 months, but that wasn't the most disturbing part. New ships looked different, sleeker, more aggressive. With weapon systems that his tactical computers couldn't identify, Captain Lee Byung-hun stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, humanity's newest heavy cruiser. The ship was a marvel of human engineering combined with salvaged alien technology. Every piece of wreckage from Kepler 442b had been studied, analyzed, and reverse-engineered by Earth's best scientists, working in shifts around the clock. "Contact," Weapons Officer Kim Hae-won called out from her station. 14 Valdorian ships dropping out of hyperspace. 2 dreadnoughts, 12 heavy cruisers. They're moving into attack formation. Lee Byung-hun smiled grimly. "I'd been a cargo pilot before the war, hauling supplies between Earth and the outer colonies. Now he commanded one of humanity's most advanced warships, crewed by volunteers who had lost everything to the Valdorians. Every person on his bridge had a personal score to settle. All stations battle ready," he ordered. "Remember what they did to our people at Kepler? No. Today we show them that humans learn from their mistakes." The Indomitable had been built using technology that shouldn't have existed. Human engineers had torn apart every piece of Valdorian wreckage they could find, studying their energy weapons, their shield systems, their hull armor. But they didn't just copy the alien technology. They improved it. Dr. Song-gyun, the ship's chief science officer, had spent sleepless weeks analyzing Valdorian plasma weapons. She discovered that their power output followed predictable patterns, with slight variations in frequency that could be exploited. Working with the engineering team, she developed adaptive shielding that could actually absorb incoming plasma fire and convert it into power for the ship's own weapons. As the Valdorian fleet approached, Vexter studied the primitive human ships. With contempt, they were smaller than his cruisers, clearly inferior in every way. This would be another easy victory to add to his collection. "All ships, open fire," he commanded. "Show these primitives the price of defiance." The crimson beams of Valdorian plasma cannons lanced through space, each one carrying enough energy to vaporize a city block. Human ships should have been destroyed instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. The plasma beams struck the human shields and simply disappeared, absorbed like water into a sponge. Energy absorption at maximum, Kim Hae-won reported, her voice tight with excitement. All weapon systems charging to full power. The Indomitable returned fire with weapons that made the Valdorians' plasma cannons look like toys. The human missiles were guided by advanced AI systems that could think and adapt in real time. As they flew toward their targets, they analyzed the Valdorian shield frequencies and adjusted their warheads accordingly. Impossible, Vexter snarled, as his flagship shuddered under the impact of multiple missile strikes. His shields, which had never failed in 2,000 years of warfare, flickered and died. How are they doing this? The answer came from Lieutenant Commander Park Jae-sung, the Indomitable's tactical officer. Sir, their shields operate on a harmonic frequency pattern. We've programmed our missiles to disrupt those harmonics. It's like finding the right note to shatter a wine glass. The battle quickly turned into a nightmare for the Valdorians. Their superior technology meant nothing when the humans had figured out how to turn it against them. Ship after ship found their shields failing, their weapons systems overloading, their hulls breached by human boarding parties. Colonel Choi Min-ho led one of those boarding parties. His Marines equipped with weapons specifically designed to fight Valdorians. The ammunition was made from depleted uranium cores, wrapped in a ceramic shell that could punch through alien armor like paper. Their combat suits were enhanced with salvaged Valdorian technology, giving them strength and speed that matched their reptilian enemies. The boarding pod struck the Valdorian cruiser Ravager with the force of a meteor, cutting through the hull like a hot knife through butter. Min-ho and his team poured through the breach, their weapons blazing. The Valdorians fought back with their usual disciplined tactics. But humans fought with something far more dangerous. Pure rage fueled by the memory of their murdered colonists. Move, 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 Min-ho shouted as his team advanced through the alien corridors. The Valdorian ship was a maze of curved passages and strange architecture, but his Marines adapted quickly. They used the ship's own gravity systems against the defenders, creating choke points and ambush sites. The fighting was brutal in close quarters. Valdorian warriors, each one a veteran of countless battles, found themselves outmatched by humans, who fought with desperate creativity. Where the aliens followed standard combat protocols, humans improvised explosive devices from ship components, used maintenance shafts to outflank their enemies, and turned the ship's own systems into weapons. Bridge secured, Min-ho reported as his team burst into the Ravager's command center. The surviving Valdorians stared at the humans in shock, unable to comprehend how their technologically superior ship had been taken by primitives with inferior weapons. Throughout the battle, Captain Lee Boon-hun watched from the Indomitable's bridge as the impossible became reality. The mighty Valdorian Second Fleet, which had never known defeat, was being systematically destroyed by human ships that had been built in a matter of months. Admiral Vexter is retreating, Kim Hae-won reported. His flagship is heavily damaged, and he's lost 3 cruisers. Let him go, Lee, Byung-hun said quietly. Let him return to his empire and tell them what happened here. Let them know that humanity is no longer prey. As the surviving Valdorian ships limped away from Earth, they left behind more than just wreckage and casualties. They left behind their reputation for invincibility, their aura of unstoppable might. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Valdorian Empire had been defeated in open battle. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The species that had cowered before the Valdorians for millennia suddenly began to hope. If humans could defeat the invincible empire, perhaps freedom was possible after all. But Admiral Vexter was not finished. As his damaged flagship limped back to Valdorian space, he was already planning his revenge. The humans had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He would return with a fleet large enough to crack planets, and this time, he would show no mercy. The awakening had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months After the Battle of Earth, the war had spread across 12 star systems, like a cancer eating through the galaxy. What the Valdorians had expected to be a simple conquest had become their worst nightmare, a grinding, brutal campaign against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every defeat. General Yoon Tae-young stood in the command center of Fortress Luna, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of fleets across known space. The moon's surface had been transformed into humanity's greatest military base, its ancient craters now housing massive railgun batteries that could fire projectiles at near-light speed. Deep beneath the surface, factories worked around the clock, building weapons that would have been impossible just a year ago. "Sir, we're receiving reports from the Proxima Centauri system," his aide, Colonel Naman-Su, announced. "The Valdorian Fourth Fleet has arrived with 60 ships. They're demanding surrender." Yoon Tae-young smiled coldly. He had spent his entire career studying warfare, but the Valdorians had taught him something new, that conventional tactics were useless against an enemy with superior technology. So humanity had stopped playing by conventional rules. "Tell Captain Oh Jin-woo to proceed with Operation Starburst," he ordered, "and may God have mercy on their souls." In the Proxima Centauri system, Captain Oh Jin-woo sat in the pilot's seat of the cargo ship Eternal Flame. The vessel looked like an ordinary freight hauler, the kind that had carried supplies between human colonies for decades. But hidden in its cargo hold were 12 nuclear warheads, each one powerful enough to crack a moon. "This is Eternal Flame to all volunteer ships," Oh Jin-woo spoke into his communicator. "Remember, we're not just dying today. We're buying time. For our families to live." 43 other cargo ships, each piloted by volunteers who had lost everything to the Valdorians, formed up around the Eternal Flame. They were farmers, miners, teachers, and shopkeepers who had answered humanity's desperate call. They knew they weren't coming home, but they also knew their sacrifice would save millions of lives. The Valdorian Fourth Fleet, commanded by Admiral Krevok, watched the approaching human ships with contempt. "Pathetic," he hissed to his officers. "They're sending cargo vessels against our battle fleet. This will be over in minutes." But as the human ships accelerated toward the Valdorian formation, something unexpected happened. Instead of firing their weapons, the cargo ships began to spread out, moving at maximum speed directly toward the alien warships. The Valdorians realized too late what was happening. "Ramming attack," Krevak shouted. "All ships, emergency maneuvers." The first cargo ship struck the Valdorian cruiser Deathbringer at nearly 10% of light speed. The nuclear warheads detonated on impact, creating a miniature sun that vaporized both ships instantly. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from the outer planets of the system. One by one, the human volunteers found their targets. The Valdorian fleet, designed for long-range combat, couldn't maneuver fast enough to avoid the kamikaze attacks. Ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were destroyed by converted freight haulers, piloted by ordinary humans who refused to let their species die quietly. "Impossible," Krevak whispered as his flagship shuddered under the impact of debris from a nearby explosion. "They're insane. No civilized species would sacrifice themselves like this." But the sacrifice worked. The Valdorian formation broke apart, allowing the human battle fleet to close to optimal range. Captain Park Mung-soo, commanding the heavy cruiser Vengeance, led the charge. His ship had been built using technology salvaged from a dozen alien wrecks, its weapons systems powered by the fury of an entire species. "For Kepler-4 to be," he shouted as his ship's railguns opened fire. The tungsten projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds, punched through Valdorian armor like bullets through tissue paper. Meanwhile, deep in the underground laboratories of New Geneva, Dr. Han So-young worked on humanity's most secret weapon. The research facility had been carved out of solid rock, its walls lined with lead to prevent any radiation leaks. She and her team were developing something that would have been unthinkable before the war. Biological weapons designed specifically to kill Valdorians. "The key is their immune system," she explained to her research team during one of their rare breaks. "They've evolved to resist most toxins and diseases, but they've never encountered Earth's pathogens. We can modify common viruses to target their Specific genetic markers. Dr. Yang Kudong, her chief assistant, looked uncomfortable. Are we sure about this? Using biological weapons goes against everything we've stood for as a species. Han Soyoung's eyes hardened. He didn't hesitate to exterminate 50,000 colonists. He didn't show mercy to the children at Kepler 4 for to be. We're not fighting a conventional enemy. We're fighting for survival. The work was dangerous and exhausting. The team had to handle deadly pathogens while wearing full protective suits, working in sterile environments where a single mistake could kill them all. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that their research could save humanity from extinction. The breakthrough came when they discovered that Valdorian blood cells were vulnerable to a modified version of the common cold virus. The alien immune system, so effective against energy weapons and radiation, couldn't cope with a simple Earth pathogen that had been engineered to attack their respiratory system. It's beautiful in its simplicity, Han Soyoung said as she watched. The test results were so advanced, so superior, that they never considered the threat of something as basic as a virus. The weapon was deployed 3 months later during the Battle of Wolf 359. Human Special Forces, led by Major Kim Dong-hyun, infiltrated a Valdorian supply depot and released the modified virus into their air recycling system. Within hours, the entire garrison was dead, their bodies overcome by what appeared to be a harmless respiratory infection. The psychological impact was devastating. Valdorian soldiers, who had never known fear, began to panic at the first sign of illness. They couldn't trust their own air, their own food, their own equipment. The humans had weaponized the very act of breathing. Back on Fortress Luna, General Yoon Tae-young watched the strategic displays with grim satisfaction. The Valdorians were retreating from 3 more systems, their fleets reduced to half strength. But he knew this was just the beginning. They're starting to understand, he told his staff. For 2,000 years, they've fought civilized enemies who followed the rules of war, but we're not civilized anymore. We're survivors, and survivors will do anything to win. The war had changed humanity in ways that would have been unimaginable before the first attack. Children learned to handle weapons before they could properly read. Scientists who had once worked to cure diseases now created new ones. Engineers who had built hospitals now designed warships. But the Valdorians were changing too. For the first time in their history, they were afraid. The humans had shown them that technology alone wasn't enough to guarantee victory.
They had
learned that a species fighting for survival could be far more dangerous than one fighting for conquest. As the reports of human victories spread across the galaxy, other species began to take notice. The Valdorian Empire, once thought invincible, was bleeding. And if humans could make them bleed, perhaps they could make them die. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted. The hunters were becoming the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year into the war, humanity stopped playing defense and went on the hunt. The Valdorian Empire, which had never faced a sustained attack on their own territory, suddenly found their most secure worlds under siege by an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear. Just as quickly, Captain Jang Haijin commanded. The UES Shadow's Edge, a ship that officially didn't exist. Built in secret shipyards hidden in asteroid fields, it was humanity's first true stealth vessel. Its hull was covered in adaptive camouflage that could mimic the background radiation of space, making it nearly invisible to Valdorian sensors. Target. Acquired, her tactical officer, Lieutenant Cho Haeonwoo, reported quietly. Valdorian supply convoy, 12 ships escorted by 4 heavy cruisers. Haijin studied the holographic display showing the enemy formation. The supply ships were carrying weapons and ammunition to the front lines, enough firepower to devastate 3 human worlds. But they would never reach their destination. Remember the plan, she told her crew. We hit fast, we hit hard, and we disappear before they know what happened. No survivors, no witnesses. The Shadow's Edge had been designed for one purpose: to bring terror to the Valdorian Empire. Its weapons were specifically chosen for psychological impact rather than raw destruction. Plasma cutters that could slice through ship hulls like butter, virus bombs that would corrupt enemy computer systems, and most terrifying of all, boarding pods filled with human marines who fought like demons. The attack began at 0300 ship time. The Shadow's Edge materialized from the void like a ghost, its weapons already firing. The first supply ship exploded in a ball of flame before the escorts even knew they were under attack. The second ship suffered a catastrophic hull breach, its cargo bay venting atmosphere and ammunition into space. Enemy cruiser turning to engage, Cho Hyunwoo reported. They're trying to lock onto us with their targeting systems. Let them try, Hyjin replied coldly. Engage stealth mode and come about. We'll hit them from their blind spot. The Valdorian cruiser Bloodfang fired its plasma cannons at empty space, its sensors showing nothing but cosmic background radiation. The human ship had simply vanished, leaving no trace of its presence. But the attacks continued, supply ships exploding one by one as an invisible enemy picked them apart. "This is impossible," snarled Commander Vexcall from the bridge of the Bloodfang. "Nothing can penetrate our sensor net. Show yourselves, cowards." The answer came in the form of a boarding pod that punched through the cruiser's hull like a bullet, through paper. Inside were 12 human marines led by Sergeant Major Kong Damon, their faces hidden behind featureless black masks that had become the stuff of nightmares among Valdorian crews. The fighting inside the Bloodfang was brutal and terrifying. The humans moved through the ship like shadows, peering from ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels to strike at the crew. They used the ship's own gravity systems against the defenders, creating zero-G zones where human agility gave them a deadly advantage. "They're not fighting like soldiers," one surviving Valdorian would later report. "They're fighting like predators, like something that evolved to hunt and kill." Within an hour, the entire convoy was destroyed. The Shadow's Edge vanished back into the void, leaving behind only wreckage and the growing legend of the human ghost ship that could strike anywhere, anytime. But Captain Hyjin's crew was just one part of humanity's new strategy. Across Valdorian, space-similar attacks were taking place. Human special forces, trained in tactics that would have been considered war crimes before the invasion, struck at power plants, communication centers, and civilian infrastructure. The most audacious mission was planned for Valdros Prime itself, the heavily fortified homeworld of the Valdorian Empire. The planet was surrounded by orbital defense platforms that could obliterate entire fleets. Its surface was protected by energy shields that had never been breached in 2,000 years of war. "They think their homeworld is untouchable, General," Yoon Taeyong explained to the mission commanders. "We're going to prove them wrong." Major Seo Chongman led the infiltration team, a group of volunteers who had been surgically altered to look like Valdorian maintenance workers. The process was agonizing. Their bones were lengthened, their skin grafted with reptilian scales, their voices modified to produce the characteristic hissing sounds of Valdorian speech. "Won't be coming back," the general told them honestly. "Even if the mission succeeds, you'll be stranded on an enemy world with no way home." Chongman looked at his team: engineers, demolition experts, and hackers who had volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission. "We understand, sir, but if we can take down their defenses, even for a few minutes, it'll be worth it." The infiltration took months of careful preparation. The human agents used stolen Valdorian transport ships to reach the homeworld, carrying forged identification and cover stories that had been crafted down to the smallest detail. They posed as replacement workers for the planet's massive power grid, the network of fusion reactors that powered everything from the orbital shields to the streetlights in Valdorian cities. Dr. Park Ji-won, the team's technical specialist, had studied the captured Valdorian technology for over a year. She knew exactly where to place the charges for maximum effect. "The power grid has 17 critical nodes," she explained to her team. "If we can take out just 5 of them simultaneously, the entire network will collapse." The team split up, each member taking responsibility for multiple targets. They worked slowly and carefully, placing their explosives over a period of weeks. The charges were designed to look like routine maintenance equipment. It's invisible to casual inspection, but containing enough explosive power to shatter reinforced fusion conduits. Changmin personally handled the most dangerous target, the primary control center that regulated power flow across the entire planet. Getting inside required him to disable 3 separate security systems and avoid dozens of guards, all while maintaining his alien disguise. "Control, this is Maintenance Team 7, he reported in perfect Valdorian, his modified vocal cords producing the alien language flawlessly. "We've located the power fluctuation in Sector 12. Beginning repairs now." The security guard barely glanced at his identification before waving him through. To the aliens, he was just another worker doing a routine job. He was placing charges that would bring down their entire civilization at exactly 1400 local time. All the charges detonated simultaneously. The explosions were relatively small, but they hit the power grid at precisely the right points. Like a house of cards, the entire network collapsed in a cascade failure that plunged the planet into darkness. The orbital shields, deprived of power, flickered and died. For 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The most heavily defended world in Valdorian space was completely vulnerable. It was exactly the window that Commander Bae Sung-wook had been waiting for. His strike fleet, hidden in the outer system, emerged from behind the planet's largest moon at maximum acceleration. The ships were loaded with kinetic projectiles, solid tungsten rods, that would strike the surface with the force of nuclear weapons. "All ships, commence orbital bombardment," Bae commanded. "Target all military installations, communication centers, and government buildings. Show them what happens when they threaten humanity." The bombardment lasted less than 5 minutes, but it was devastating. The Valdorian military command structure, built over centuries, was reduced to rubble. The orbital shipyards where their mighty dreadnoughts were constructed became fields of twisted metal. The communication arrays that coordinated their empire fell silent. Admiral Vexter watched from his flagship in orbit as his homeworld burned. The humans had done the impossible. They had struck at the heart of the Valdorian Empire and left it crippled. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. "How?" he whispered, his mandibles clicking in disbelief as he watched the fires spread across the planet's surface. "How did primitives breach our defenses?" The answer came from Commander Bae Sung-wook, whose voice crackled over the communication system with cold satisfaction. "We learned from our enemies, Admiral. You taught us to be monsters when you murdered our colonists. Showed us that in war, there are no rules, no mercy, no limits. Now face the consequences of your own lessons." The attack on Valdros Prime changed everything. News of the successful strike spread through the galaxy like wildfire, inspiring species that had been enslaved by the Valdorians for centuries to rise up in rebellion. The empire that had ruled through fear and intimidation suddenly found itself fighting wars on dozens of fronts. But for humanity, the victory came at a terrible cost. Major Seo Chung-men and his team were captured and executed, their true identities discovered too late to save them. Their sacrifice had bought humanity a crucial advantage, but it also marked the point of no return. The war had become something darker, more brutal than anyone had imagined. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. 2 years after the war began, the mighty Valdorian Empire had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. What had once been 3,000 star systems under their control was now barely 50 worlds, most of them burning or under siege by human forces and their new alien allies. Admiral Vexter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Worldbreaker, watching the tactical display with growing despair. The fortress world of Krexmal was humanity's final target, the last stronghold of Valdorian power in the galaxy. Around him, the remnants of the once invincible Imperial fleet prepared for their final battle. "Admiral," his tactical officer, reported, voice shaking with barely controlled fear, "long-range sensors are detecting the human fleet. 200 ships, including 12 dreadnoughts." Vexter's mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter or despair. 200 ships. 2 years ago, he would have laughed at such a small force. He knew that each human vessel was worth 10 Valdorian ships. The primitives had learned too well. Fleet Admiral Kim Dae-ho stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's most powerful warship. The massive dreadnought was 5 kilometers long, its hull a patchwork of human steel and salvaged Valdorian armor. Every weapon system, every piece of technology, every tactical doctrine had been paid for in blood and bought with the lives of human colonists. "Sir," communications officer Park Soo-jin reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Valdorian fleet." The holographic display showed Admiral Vexter's reptilian face, but he looked nothing like the arrogant predator who had first threatened Earth. His scales were dulled with age and stress, his eyes haunted by the ghosts of his fallen empire. Human Admiral Vexter's voice was barely a whisper. "I propose a final meeting. Ship to ship, commander to commander. Let us end this war with honor." Kim Dae-ho studied his enemy's face for a long moment. This was the alien who had ordered the massacre at Kepler-44b, who had threatened to enslave humanity, who had started a war that had consumed entire star systems. But he was also a soldier, like himself. "Very well," Kim replied, "but know this. We offer you one chance to surrender. The mercy you denied our colonies, we will grant to your people. But this is your final opportunity." The transmission ended. Around the bridge of the Retribution, the command crew prepared for what they all knew would be the last battle of the war. Captain Lee Byung-hun, now serving as Kim's tactical advisor, ran final checks on the ship's weapon systems. The railguns were loaded with tungsten rounds that could punch through a planet's crust. The missile tubes held warheads that could crack moons. "All ships report ready," Lee announced. "The fleet is at your command, Admiral." Kim Dae-ho looked out at the stars, thinking of the 50,000 colonists who had died at Kepler-4 for to be. Of the volunteers who had sacrificed themselves at Proxima Centauri, of Major Seo Changmin and his team who had died on Valdros Prime. This battle would be for all of them. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Final engagement." No quarter asked, none given. The Valdorian response came not in words but in action. Vexter's remaining ships, 67 vessels that represented the last military power of a dying empire, charged directly at the human fleet. They had nothing left to lose and everything to prove, incoming warned weapons officer Kim Hae-won. "All ships, full power to forward shields." The space between the two fleets erupted in light and fury. Valdorian plasma cannons, still fearsome, despite their age, lanced out at the human ships. But the humans had learned to turn their enemies' weapons against them. The adaptive shielding that had saved Earth now protected the entire fleet, absorbing the alien fire and converting it into power for their own weapons. The human response was devastating. Railgun rounds accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, tore through Valdorian armor like paper. Missile swarms, guided by AI that had learned from 2 years of constant warfare, found every weakness in the alien defenses. Captain Oh Jin-woo, now commanding the heavy cruiser Eternal Flame II, named after the ship that had been sacrificed at Proxima Centauri, led a squadron of human vessels in a flanking maneuver that would have been impossible for the primitive ships that had first faced the Valdorians. "Target their command ship," he ordered. "Take out Vexter, and this war ends." The battle raged for 6 hours. One by one, the Valdorian ships were destroyed or crippled. The world-breaker Vexter's flagship fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, its weapons blazing until the very end. But human tactics, human technology, and human determination proved superior. Lieutenant Colonel Park Ji-hoon led the final boarding action onto the dying world-breaker. His Marines, veterans of dozens of battles, moved through the alien ship with practiced efficiency. They found Admiral Vexter on his bridge, wounded but still standing, his scaled hands resting on the tactical display. "It's over," Park told him quietly. "Your empire is finished." Vexter looked up at the human officer, his yellow eyes filled with something that might have been respect. "You were supposed to be primitives," he said. "How did you become so strong?" "You," Tadas Park replied. "Every attack, every threat, every act of cruelty made us stronger. You created your own destroyers." The final Valdorian ship surrendered an hour later. The war was over. In the aftermath, as rescue crews worked to save what few Valdorian survivors remained, Lieutenant Colonel Park Ji-hoon stood in the ruins of Krexmol's command center. The fortress world's surface was scarred by orbital bombardment, Its once proud military installations reduced to rubble. He activated the planetary communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies to every species in the galaxy. This is Lieutenant Colonel Park Ji-hoon of the United Earth Defense Force. The Valdorian Empire is no more. For 2,000 years, they ruled through fear and intimidation. Today, that reign of terror ends. The message was picked up by communications arrays across the galaxy. On worlds that had cowered in fear for millennia, enslaved populations looked up at the stars with new hope. The monsters were gone. "We are humans," Park continued. "We offered peace, and they chose war. We offered cooperation, and they chose conquest. Let this be a lesson to any species that threatens us. We are not your prey. We never were. We are your apex predators, and we will defend ourselves and our allies with everything we have." The galaxy listened in stunned silence. The Valdorians, who had seemed invincible just 2 years ago, were extinct. In their place stood humanity scarred, battle-hardened, forever changed by the war they never wanted but had definitively won. Within days, the first diplomatic missions began arriving at Earth. The Crystalline Collective, an ancient species that had hidden in the galactic core for centuries, sent ambassadors offering advanced technology in exchange for protection. The hive mind of Kepler-90, a collective intelligence that had been enslaved by the Valdorians for 500 years, offered to share their vast knowledge of galactic history. Most surprisingly, the artificial intelligences of the Sigma Draconis, system machines that had been built by a race the Valdorians had exterminated, offered to serve as humanity's information network across the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Kim Dae-ho, now appointed as humanity's first galactic ambassador, met with each delegation personally. "We're not interested in building an empire," he told them. "We've seen what empires do to their subjects. We want allies, not servants. Partners, not slaves." The new galactic order that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of one species dominating all others, it was a confederation of equals, united by their shared experience of Valdorian oppression and their gratitude to humanity for ending it. Dr. Han So-young, the scientist who had developed the biological weapons that helped turn the tide of war, now worked to cure diseases that had plagued alien species for centuries. Captain Jang Haijin, once commander of the stealth ship Shadow's Edge, now led exploration missions to find new worlds for the refugees of the war. But humanity never forgot the lessons of the Valdorian War. Earth remained heavily defended, fleets ready to respond to any threat. The galaxy had learned that humans could be the most generous allies or the most terrible enemies. The choice was theirs. The Yandere Triclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.